They called it the Age of Reason. But behind closed doors, reason was the last thing on anyone's mind. In the glittering halls of Georgian England, where powdered wigs hid sweat and shame, a secret world of pleasure, power, and perversion began to bloom. This is the story of the Libertines, men and women who believed morality was a cage, and they were born to break it. The streets of London in the 18th century were a contradiction made flesh. By day, they were filled with the hum of commerce, horse-drawn carriages clattering over cobblestones, merchants shouting over the scent of fish and fresh bread, the grand facades of townhouses standing like marble masks. But by night, that same city transformed. The gas lamps flickered. The air turned heavy with perfume and tobacco, and the elite descended into a theater of sin that defied everything polite society claimed to stand for. The Georgian era was ruled by excess. England had survived civil wars, dethroned kings, and crossed oceans to build an empire. Now, it wanted to celebrate, to taste, to feel, to indulge. The rich spent fortunes on lace, brandy, and lovers. Pleasure became not a pastime, but a philosophy, and the libertines were its high priests. They believed life's only sin was denying desire. They drank to madness, gambled to ruin, and loved without limits. And in their wake, they left behind scandals so shocking that even centuries later, the whisper of their names can make history blush. But who were these libertines, really? Were they rebels against hypocrisy, daring souls who challenged the tyranny of morality? Or were they monsters born of privilege, feeding on those too poor or powerless to resist them? To understand them, we need to step into their world, to see England not as it wanted to be remembered, but as it truly was. The Georgian era began in 1714 with the rise of King George I, a German prince who spoke little English and cared even less for his subjects. His reign marked the start of a dynasty that would last more than a century, a time of empire, enlightenment, and moral confusion. The wealthy elite, freed from the rigid piety of the Puritans, now saw pleasure as proof of power. Balls, masquerades, and brothels became the lifeblood of the upper class. London itself turned into a playground where sin had a price tag, and everyone was buying. Among the candlelit drawing rooms and velvet-draped parlors, a new breed of aristocrat emerged, the libertine. They were poets, politicians, dukes, and dandies, men like the Earl of Rochester, whose poetry dripped with wit and vice, or Sir Francis Dashwood, who built the notorious Hellfire Club. Your members dressed as monks and worshipped not God, but lust. They were the idols of their time, admired and despised in equal measure. The public pretended to hate them, but couldn't stop reading about them. To the common people, the libertines seemed untouchable. Their wealth shielded them from scandal, and their charm made sin look like art. They hosted secret feasts where champagne flowed like rivers, where masks fell away with morals, and where women, and sometimes men, were treated as playthings in games of seduction and control. But beneath the laughter and the music, something darker stirred. Because when power meets pleasure without restraint, cruelty often follows. Behind every Georgian masquerade was a mask of hypocrisy. The same politicians who voted for morality laws by day were found in brothels by night. The same preachers who condemned sin from the pulpit secretly sought it in the alleyways of Covent Garden. The city became a living paradox, where virtue was for show and vice was a sport. And yet, amidst the debauchery, there was something undeniably magnetic about the Libertines. They were witty, daring, and unapologetically alive. In a world bound by etiquette and repression, they were the ones who refused to whisper. They mocked the church, scorned the king, and celebrated the body as the truest temple of all. Their lives became both inspiration and warning. A glimpse of what happens when desire outruns morality, when curiosity turns into obsession. But their story isn't just about lust and luxury. It's about the society that made them, a society obsessed with appearances, terrified of judgment, and desperate to forget the poverty rotting beneath its powdered surface. Because while the elite waltzed through glittering banquets, the streets outside were filled with beggars, thieves, and children dying in the gutters. The Libertines were a symptom of a larger disease, one that infected every corner of Georgian England as the 18th century progressed. The moral decay of the upper classes began to rot the foundations of the empire itself. Scandals erupted like clockwork. Affairs, illegitimate heirs, duels fought over mistresses. Gone. The newspapers fed on it, turning private sin into public theater. And yet, no matter how many were ruined, new libertines rose to take their place. The culture of indulgence had become too powerful to stop. The question isn't why they fell. It's why they rose in the first place. What was it about this age, this glittering, gaslit era, that made sin not only acceptable but fashionable? To answer that, we must look closer at the men and women who lived it. Their desires, longing for imagination and grace, their secrets, their madness. Because the story of Georgian libertinism isn't just about pleasure. It's about what happens when a civilization starts believing it's untouchable. When the empire is rich enough, powerful enough, and proud enough to think it can defy consequence. That's when the cracks start to show. And those cracks, hidden beneath powdered wigs and silken smiles, will lead us into the heart of one of the most decadent and dangerous centuries in English history. If London was the beating heart of Georgian excess, then the Libertines were its pulse, hot, erratic, and unstoppable. They gathered, not in palaces or parliament halls, but in places that blurred the line between chapel and tavern, between philosophy and sin. To understand them, you have to picture a candlelit room filled with smoke and laughter, a table scattered with half-empty glasses of port, silk gloves discarded beside playing cards, and a circle of men who thought God was a joke and guilt a superstition. That was where the Hellfire Club was born. Sir Francis Dashwood, the man behind it all, was no ordinary aristocrat. He was witty, intelligent, dangerously charming, and utterly devoted to the art of blasphemy. He turned his estate at Medmenham Abbey into a temple of indulgence, a place where pleasure masqueraded as ritual. Guests arrived in masks and robes, pretending to be monks. They toasted to Bacchus and Venus, carved obscene jokes into the walls, and turned sacred hymns into psalms of lust. They called themselves the Monks of Medmenham. Outsiders called them the Devil's Disciples. But Dashwood wasn't alone. His circle included some of the most powerful men in England. Politicians, writers, even members of the royal court. Among them was John Wilkes, a man both loved and hated in equal measure. Wilkes was a journalist, a provocateur, and a champion of freedom of speech. Though his idea of freedom often meant freedom from decency. He was handsome in the way that scandal is attractive. Not beautiful, but bold. When he wasn't writing essays that mocked the government, he was found at Medmenham, laughing with Dashwood under candlelight, raising a glass to liberty and women. Their gatherings weren't just about pleasure. They were acts of rebellion. England, that society itself, was a mask waiting to be torn off. And yet, behind the satire and laughter, there was something sinister. The Hellfire Club didn't simply mock religion. It replaced it. Their meetings became ceremonies of inversion. Where the church spoke of virtue, they praised sin. Where priests preached humility, they celebrated arrogance. It was power for power's sake, and pleasure was the weapon they wielded best. One visitor described the Medmenham estate as a paradise built for devils. The abbey was adorned with paintings of pagan gods and frescoes of naked revelers. Underground tunnels led to chambers lit only by torchlight, where the air smelled of smoke, wine, and something else, something dangerous. There were rumors of secret rites, of candles burning in the shape of crosses turned upside down, of women veiled and masked, dancing for men who saw them as living offerings to pleasure. Whether all of it was true or exaggerated hardly mattered. The myth of the Hellfire Club was enough to make it real. Outside the abbey walls, London gossiped. The newspapers hinted at orgies and satanic rituals. The clergy thundered from the pulpit about the fall of England's soul. But Dashwood and his friends didn't care. The more they were condemned, the more powerful they felt. Each scandal was another proof that they ruled not only the state, but its very morals. Still, every age of indulgence creates its own destroyers. For the Libertines, their undoing came not from priests or politicians, but from themselves. The line between thrill and madness began to blur. What started as a game of rebellion turned into addiction, not to pleasure, but to power. They wanted to see how far they could go before something or someone broke. Meanwhile, outside their silken circles, another England was struggling to survive. The Industrial Revolution had begun to stir, and while the rich drowned in wine, the poor choked on smoke. London's underbelly swelled with laborers, prostitutes, and orphans, the forgotten cost of aristocratic indulgence. The libertines believed they were free, but their freedom was built on the misery of millions. Every feast at Medmenham, every champagne toast, echoed the hunger of the people who made that luxury possible. In the taverns of Covent Garden, the libertine ideal trickled down in dangerous ways. Brothels became temples of imitation, where men played at decadence without the cushion of nobility to protect them. Young women, drawn by the promise of luxury, found themselves trapped in cycles of exploitation. The libertine dream, that pleasure was the highest truth, had escaped the drawing rooms and entered the streets, turning desire into currency. And the women of the aristocracy weren't untouched by this fever. In salons and masquerade balls, they played their own games. The Duchess of Kingston, Elizabeth Chudleigh, was one such figure. She appeared to the world as the picture of grace, powdered hair, jeweled gowns, a smile fit for the court. But behind that smile was a woman who defied every rule of her age. She married one man in secret, then married another in public, living a double life until the scandal exploded. Her trial for bigamy became the talk of Europe. But what truly shocked society wasn't her crime. It was her confidence. She stood before the court not as a victim, but as a woman who refused to be ashamed. Women like Chudleigh and Lady Worsley became symbols of a new kind of libertinism, one that challenged not just morality, but patriarchy itself. If men could sin and be celebrated, why couldn't women? Their affairs, their divorces, their public defiance were all acts of rebellion in a world that wanted them silent. They were the female answer to the Hellfire Club, not hiding in abbeys, but walking into the light with powdered defiance. Still, society had its limits. For men, libertinism could be forgiven as boys being boys. For women, it was a sentence. The Duchess of Kingston fled to Russia, seeking the protection of Catherine the Great. Others weren't so lucky. Reputation was a fragile currency, and once it was shattered, there was no rebuilding it. But perhaps the most ironic part of the libertine legacy is that, for all their talk of freedom, they were trapped, prisoners of their own excess. Dashwood eventually abandoned the Hellfire Club, retreating into politics and silence. Wilkes, once the firebrand of rebellion, became respectable, his wildness tamed by age. The revelry faded, replaced by whispers of regret. The age of libertinism burned bright, but it could not burn forever. By the late 18th century, the mood of England had changed. The French Revolution loomed on the horizon, a warning of what happens when indulgence meets injustice. The same aristocracy that once laughed at moral restraint now trembled at the thought of guillotines. Pleasure was no longer a game. It was a risk. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the lights of the Georgian bacchanal began to dim. But even as the revelers aged and the abbeys crumbled, the idea of the libertine refused to die. It lingered in the culture, in poetry, in art, in the way society still struggles to separate desire from guilt. Because the libertines of Georgian England were more than just sinners. They were mirrors, showing a civilization exactly what it wanted and what it feared to see. And in that reflection, we see ourselves. The scandal never really ended. It simply changed its costume when the laughter at Medmenham faded and the doors to the Hellfire Club were sealed. The spirit of the libertines slipped into quills, canvases, and stages. What could no longer be shouted at midnight feasts was whispered through art. ... Painters and playwrights became the new courtiers of desire. William Hogarth, the keen-eyed satirist of London life, filled his canvases with moral warnings disguised as comedy. In A Rake's Progress, he charted the downfall of a young man who tasted every pleasure until pleasure devoured him. The audience laughed, but the laughter had an edge. They recognized themselves in the rake's powdered face. Yet for every Hogarth preaching caution, there was a poet ready to fan the flames. The ghost of the Earl of Rochester still haunted the language of the age. His verses, once banned, circulated secretly in coffee houses, quoted by students who dreamed of scandal and freedom. In the theater, playwrights pushed boundaries with double meanings and dangerous wit. The stage became a battlefield where respectability and rebellion danced together under the footlights. London's playhouses mirrored the streets outside, bright at the front, filthy behind. The audience came not only for art, but for adventure. The boxes were filled with noblemen hunting glances from actresses. The galleries roared with apprentices who mocked their betters. Theater was democracy in its most intoxicating form, and nowhere did the Georgian hunger for sensation burn hotter. In drawing rooms and salons, writers debated the purpose of art. Should it instruct, or should it thrill? The libertine answer was simple. Why not both? Desire itself was a kind of truth, and art that denied it was dishonest. This belief seeped into novels, into paintings of reclining nymphs and mythic seductions, into music that swelled like breath. The polite world pretended to frown, but it couldn't look away. Behind the scenes, printers risked prison to publish forbidden works. Erotic pamphlets passed from hand to hand beneath the counters of bookshops in St. Paul's churchyard. Titles were coy. Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure, The School of Venus, but the message was clear. Curiosity was stronger than fear. These secret texts revealed a society addicted to the very things it condemned. And then came the philosophers, those clever architects of excuses. The Enlightenment had taught people to question everything: church, crown, even conscience. If reason ruled the universe, why should instinct be shameful? Thinkers like David Hume and the French libertines across the Channel argued that morality was merely custom, a trick of upbringing. In this new gospel of pleasure, sin was no longer eternal. It was negotiable. But England, unlike France, loved its hypocrisies. The same nobleman who recited Voltaire at dinner might denounce obscenity in Parliament the next morning. The duel between indulgence and restraint was becoming the national sport. The newspapers fed it daily, printing sermons beside scandals, turning morality itself into entertainment. Still, every rebellion invites a reaction. As the century neared its end, the pendulum began to swing. The whispers of revolution, drifting from Paris, chilled the blood of London's elite. Suddenly, pleasure looked dangerous, not because it offended God, but because it threatened order. If the aristocracy was seen as corrupt, the mob might not stop at laughter. Writers who once glorified passion now preached virtue. Painters softened their nudes into angels. The libertines' wit became the sentimental tear. Novels like Richardson's Pamela and Clarissa warned that innocence, once lost, could never be regained. The age that had worshipped desire began to canonize self-control. Yet even as morality tightened its grip, the old fire smoldered. The seeds planted by the libertines would bloom again in the poetry of Byron, in the scandals of Shelley, in every artist who mistook temptation for truth. The libertine had not vanished. He had evolved. But behind those curtains, the same impulses stirred. The Georgian Libertines had shown England a secret it could never unlearn. That desire and hypocrisy grow from the same root. You can prune the branches, but the roots remain. As gaslight replaced candlelight, and the empire spread across the world, the echoes of those wild nights at Medmenham lingered. They haunted the novels, the laws, even the etiquette books. Every new rule of propriety was in truth a confession of old guilt. The libertines of Georgian England had tried to live without limits. They failed, but in their failure, they revealed the fragile heart of civilization itself. Strip away the wigs and the Latin mottos, and their story is our story. The endless struggle between what we want and what we're told to be. Their abbeys are ruins now. The laughter has faded, but somewhere in every age, a door closes, the candles are lit, and someone raises a glass to the forbidden. Time has a way of softening scandal. What was once shocking becomes charming. What was whispered in fear is later told with a wink. The libertines of Georgian England are no longer blasphemers in our eyes, but characters, part villains, part visionaries, frozen in portraits with knowing smiles. Yet their legacy runs deeper than gossip. They changed how the English, and eventually the world, thought about freedom. The 18th century had claimed to value reason above all, but reason without restraint gave birth to excess. When the Georgian elite pursued pleasure as philosophy, they created a mirror that revealed both brilliance and rot. Their wit produced poetry and art that still moves us. Their cruelty exposed the hypocrisy of class and gender. Their rebellion forced society to define what it truly believed. In tearing off their masks, the libertines forced everyone else to look at theirs. Their ghost wandered through the Romantic era, inspiring poets to mix passion with pain. Lord Byron, with his scandalous loves and dark glamour, was the perfect heir. Half hero, half monster. He called himself mad, bad, and dangerous to know, echoing the whispers once spoken about the Hellfire Club. Shelley, Keats, and even the pre-Raphaelites later would chase the same fever. The idea that beauty, desire, and destruction were inseparable. By the Victorian age, the libertine had become a cautionary tale. Moral reformers preached chastity, families locked up their daughters, and London cleaned its streets, but not its conscience. The ghost of Georgian indulgence haunted every brothel, every gentleman's club, every private diary written in trembling ink. The respectable citizens who condemned sin still sought it in secret. The difference was only in lighting. Candlelight became gaslight, and the mask grew thicker. And that is the enduring irony. The libertines believed they were free, but they were trapped by their appetites. The Victorians believed they were moral, but they were chained by their fear. Between the two ages lies the eternal struggle of human nature, the craving for control and the hunger to lose it. Modern culture, for all its screams and slogans, has not escaped that struggle. The libertine spirit lives in the influencers who turn intimacy into spectacle, in the celebrities who rise on scandal, in every society that worships image over substance. Georgian England didn't die. It evolved with new wigs and brighter lights. The same contradictions pulse beneath our own glitter. To study the libertines is to study the human condition stripped of disguise. They remind us that reason and desire are not enemies but partners in a dangerous dance. Without restraint, reason collapses into cruelty. Without desire, life becomes a sermon no one wants to hear. The balance between the two, fragile, shifting, endlessly tested, is what keeps civilization from devouring itself. When you picture the libertines, don't just see the powdered wigs and the velvet coats. Hear the laughter echoing through marble halls. Smell the wine, the candle smoke, the perfume. See the moment when indulgence turns to exhaustion, when the mask slips and the reveler glimpses the void beneath. That's the truth they left behind. Not glory, not sin, but a warning. 'Cause in the end, every age has its hellfire club. Every empire, convinced of its brilliance, builds an abbey where conscience is locked outside and desire holds mass. And every empire, sooner or later, pays the price. The Georgian age paid it in scandal and ruin. What price will ours pay? The libertines thought they could escape consequence by turning it into a joke. But history, patient and amused, always gets the last laugh. Their portraits still hang in dusty galleries. Eyes painted bright with arrogance. They look down on us as if daring us to judge them. Perhaps the only honest response is a quiet nod of recognition. Because what destroyed them wasn't pleasure, it was emptiness. They mistook excess for freedom and found only loneliness. Their banquets ended in silence, their laughter in echoes. But their defiance left a mark that still glows in art, in language, in every question we ask about who we are when no one is watching. So the next time you hear the name of a libertine whispered in history's ear, Dashwood, Wilkes, Chudleigh, Rochester, remember that they were not simply rebels or sinners. They were explorers of the forbidden, charting the borders of human desire. And those borders, even now, remain uncharted. History paints them as cautionary tales, yet their fire still burns wherever people seek to live without apology. The Georgian Libertines fell, but the world they revealed still stands. A world of glitter and guilt, forever flickering between light and shadow. If this story tells us anything, it's that civilization isn't measured by its virtue, but by what it hides. The Libertines tore back the curtain and forced England to look. And what they saw, once seen, could never be unseen. The candles are out now. The abbeys are empty. But somewhere, in the quiet hum of the present, their laughter still lingers, soft, daring, unrepentant. Watch the next story, because the ghosts of history never really die. They just find new names.